This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. My empathy is creeping towards what I would describe a contemptuous rage. It's Poor Things, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We have, I believe, every single one of our segments and quite a bit to talk about, so we're going to jump right into it with Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
If you have not read or watched Poor Things, but specifically watched, because this is going to be a summary of the film, here is a synopsis. Spoilers obviously covers the whole thing, but yes, this is a summary of Poor Things, the film, so you have some grounding for our conversations. Sourced from Wikipedia. In Victorian London, the medical student Max McCandles becomes an assistant to the eccentric surgeon Godwin Baxter. Max falls in love with Godwin's ward Bella, a childlike young woman. Godwin reveals that Bella's body is that of a woman who was pregnant and committed suicide by leaping off a bridge. Godwin then replaced the woman's brain with that of her fetus, giving her an infant's mind, and named her Bella Baxter. With Godwin's encouragement, Max asks for Bella's hand in marriage. Bella accepts, but as her intelligence rapidly develops, she becomes curious about the outside world and herself. She soon discovers masturbation and sexual pleasure. She runs off with Duncan Wedderburn, a debauched lawyer whom Godwin hired to overhaul the nuptial contract. Deciding to let her go, Godwin begins a new experiment with a young woman named Felicity, who matures more slowly than Bella. Bella and Duncan embark on a grand journey beginning in Lisbon, where they have frequent intercourse. Bella is mistakenly addressed as Victoria Blessington by a fellow hotel guest. When Bella becomes difficult for him to control, Duncan smuggles her onto a cruise ship. Bella befriends two passengers who opened her mind to philosophy. Duncan attempts to stunt her growth to no avail. He becomes exasperated and indulges in drinking and gambling. During a stop at Alexandria, Bella witnesses the suffering of the poor and becomes distraught. Wishing to help them, she entrusts Duncan's winnings to unscrupulous members of the crew who falsely promise to give it to them. Unable to afford the rest of the trip, Bella and Duncan are dropped off at Marseille and make their way to Paris. Seeking money and accommodation, Bella begins working at a brothel. Enraged, Duncan breaks down and Bella abandons him. At the brothel, she comes under the tutelage of Madame Swiney and begins a relationship with a prostitute, Toinette, who introduces her to socialism. Now, terminally ill, Godwin asks Max to bring Bella to him. Max finds her after tracking down Duncan, who has been institutionalized. Back in London, Bella reconciles with Godwin and renews her plans to marry Max. The wedding is interrupted by Duncan and General Alfie Blessington. The latter, addressing Bella as Victoria, declares that they were married before her disappearance and that he has come to reclaim her. Bella abandons Max to learn of her past life, but discovers Alfie's violent and sadistic nature and realizes Victoria killed herself to escape him. Alfie confines Bella to his mansion, threatens her at gunpoint to submit to genital mutilation and a subsequent rape, demanding that she drink a sedative. She tosses the sedative in his face, and after a struggle, he accidentally shoots himself in the foot before passing out. Godwin dies peacefully with Bella and Max at his side, and Bella follows Godwin in Godwin's footsteps, becoming a surgeon with the help of Max and Toinette, and transplants a goat's brain into Alfie's head. The end. The end of that really amps up there. That is a brief summary of Poor Things. We do have a Guess Who this week, so let's do it.
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay?
Despite the ogreish body, he had the wide, hopeful eyes, snub nose, and mournful mouth of an anxious infant, with a brow corrugated by 3 deep, permanent wrinkles. In the morning, his coarse brown hair was oiled and combed flat on each side of the center parting, but as the day wore on, spiky tufts of it rose behind his ears, and by mid-afternoon his scalp was as shaggy as a bear's pelt. His clothes were of expensive gray cloth, quietly fashionable and beautifully tailored to make his odd figure appear as conventional as possible, yet I felt he would look more natural in the baggy pants and turban of a pantomime Turk.
Okay. I mean, this doesn't really. So the first person that jumped to my mind as you were describing that, because I believe his hair is kind of parted like that. And so I think this is just going to be my guess is that this is Duncan Wedderburn.
No.
Okay. I don't know who else it would be. I mean, McCandless is maybe.
It's Godwin.
Okay, because that's nothing like Godwin. I mean, it's missing the most, important descriptor that I would include for Godwin in the film, which is that he is severely like scarred and,
Looks kind of stitched together.
yes, he has a Frankenstein-like appearance, and that is not mentioned at all. So I just guess it could have been him, but it didn't particularly strike me as like anything like him in the film. So sure.
Okay, well this one's gonna be easy. Her back was toward us. Curling black hair hid her body to the waist. Her legs pumped the treadles, turning the cylinder with a vigor that showed she enjoyed exercise as much as music. She flapped her arms sideways like a seagull's wings, regardless of the beat.
Okay, yeah, that would be Bella.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was pretty straightforward. That one was easy.
The words had been spoken by the very tall, thin man who stood erect, glaring steadily at us like a neatly carved, life-size wooden puppet. He looked wooden because his thick steel gray mustache, which covered his mouth, and sharply pointed beard were nearly the same tone as his pinkish-brown skin. A swarthy, thick-built, wild-looking old man was struggling to his feet beside him. Okay, ignore that last sentence.
Okay. Oh, so just that part?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to assume, and I'm going to use some context clues here, but also I think this fairly accurately fits, that this is Alfie Blessington.
Yes.
Yeah, the part where like the voice, like where whatever the start of that was about the person the voice or the person the words had come from or something like that, implies to me that it's like somebody from the back of the church yells and they turn and look or something like that. So that tracks with Alfie Blessing, and the mustache and beard are pretty accurate too. I did want to put a pin in the change to Godwin's appearance when I have a question about Godwin's backstory, I believe a little bit later. And I think it might be relevant there and to what the movie does overall with Godwin, maybe what they did with his appearance in the film. So we'll get to that. All right. That was it for Guess Who. 2 out of 3. Could be worse, but, whatever. I have quite a few questions. Let's get into them. Was that in the book?
Gaston, may I have my book, please?
How can you read this? There's no pictures.
Well, some people use their imagination.
So the film opens on a shot of a woman in a blue dress, falling off a balcony. It's hard to tell what it is at this point. Into some water. I don't even know if we see that. I don't remember how much we see here.
I think initially we just see her like standing on it.
Yeah. Okay.
And maybe
it's
maybe
confusing
the
me
water below.
Yeah, I'm mixing ideas with the what I remember from the trailer and from later in the film, but I don't remember exactly what we see. I know we see her on the railing in the opening shot, but we only see her from behind. We don't even see that it's Emma Stone. Like we just see the back of her. And then we cut right from that. We get the opening title card, and then we cut immediately to Bella, our introduction to Bella, and we're like watching her adolescence essentially as she kind of learns to move and speak in her new body, which we don't, again, at this point, we know none of this. If you were watching this film cold, like you would not know that these characters have any relation. The woman on the balcony, and now, again, most people will have seen the trailer or whatever, have some familiarity with what's going on here. But I want to know if the book does something similar, because I wasn't expecting the movie. The movie almost sets up a little bit of like a misdirect, not even a misdirect, but like a mystery of like what is Bella's actual background, and doesn't really give us any information until quite a bit into the film, where I was expecting we would more immediately know in the film, oh, okay, this is we would like see Emma Stone's character jump off the bridge and then maybe have a more traditional kind of linear narrative. But the film doesn't do that, and I wanted to know if the book did the same thing because I thought that was interesting. Because it doesn't really explain anything, so you kind of piece things together as it goes, and then there's like a reveal eventually. But
Mhm.
does the book do it that way?
Kind of, but no, also.
Okay.
So in the book, we are in McCandless's point of view
Yeah.
for like the main part of the text.
Okay.
So if you skip the introduction, as many people are wont to do,
Okay.
if you skip the introduction, then you don't know who like what Bella's deal is when we first meet her,
Okay.
and then we get her like backstory a lot quicker
In the
after
book?
meeting her
Okay.
within the book. But like if you skip the introduction and you only read the memoir, quote unquote fake memoir
Right.
part of it, then yes, kind of.
Okay.
Although it doesn't set up like a nonlinear narrative the same way that the movie does. But if you read the entire text, then the answer is no.
Okay.
You know what the deal is before
The
you.
introduction explains
Yeah.
like what's
Yes.
okay. I don't know. You're being cagey, and I'm unsure why.
Because it's not that the introduction tells you everything like before you get to the main text, but it tells you enough.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. I don't know what it tells you, so I don't want to. It's not that important, so I don't want to interrogate it forever. But I feel like you're being nebulous here, so I'll just move on.
It's also been like 2 weeks since I read the introduction part.
Okay, that's fair. That's totally fair. So, and then we start to, as we get introduced to Godwin Baxter and his estate is where the film starts, and Bella, and then we're introduced to Mr. McCandles or whatever, is Max McCandles. And I was wondering if, because one of the things we see throughout the film, but it's very noticeable immediately, is that along with Bella, there are these pets around the house that are animals sewn together, different pieces of animals. There's like a duck that's also like part pig or something. I can't remember. And then there's a chicken with a pig head, and then there's like something with a duck head. I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's all these a handful of animals that are like pieced together, and I wanted to know if that very weird element came from the book.
So that is something that the film expands on. In the book, Godwin does own 2 rabbits, and at one point he like mixes and matches. At least it's a purely black rabbit and a purely white rabbit, and he like makes 2 half and half rabbits. And then later undoes this and puts them back together the way that they originally were.
Yeah.
It's also implied that his father may or may not have done similar experiments on their dogs, but that is not definitively confirmed by the text. Godwin's kind of cagey about it.
Yeah.
I honestly thought that was kind of fun in the movie.
Yeah.
I thought it was like fun background world building,
Yeah, I
and
mean-
the animals don't seem to be suffering in
They seem
universe. They
okay.
seem fine.
Yeah.
So
And it is a this weird alternate universe where this like kind of like there's like an extra level of like scientific magicalism or something. I don't know what the word is for it,
yeah,
but like
well, it's kind of a steampunk universe, but then there's this extra layer of like Victorian weird science.
yeah, yes, exactly. It's the same thing as like Frankenstein or
Yeah.
whatever, where there's this element of it's all quote unquote scientific. These people are doing science, but it's
Yeah.
things that are fantastical,
right.
like
not,
well beyond.
not actually scientifically possible.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's a good way to establish, that he's been doing this kind of thing for
Yeah.
a long time and that sort of thing. And yeah, it just adds weird quirkiness that works. Because I have, we'll get to it later, but I actually had a kind of a similar takeaway to this film that I did with Barbie in very different, like in a different capacity. And that in terms of like what I expected the movie to be versus what I ended up thinking it kind of really actually was, which is that both of them were built up in a way where I thought they were going to be these epic treaties on feminism, which they aren't. Not that,
Yes.
but they're more importantly, they're just like comedies. Like I think is like the most important thing that the filmmakers were interested in doing was making weird, funny movies. Is kind of, and I felt similarly about Barbie, and also the quote unquote treatise on feminism that it is. I think is similar to Barbie in the sense that it was not nearly as interesting as I was expecting.
Yes.
Not maybe not interesting, but not as like gritty or like like not even elevated. What's the word? It wasn't as, it was more like kind of surface level like introduction to feminism than I was expecting.
And obviously we'll get into it. We have this whole movie to go through, but as I was going through our notes and like putting all of my stuff in, I messaged you and I said like I thought my main takeaway was like, poor things. I'm not really sure what everyone is fussing so much about.
Yes. And that was kind of similar to how I felt about Barbie, whereas like it was like, yeah, like it's, you know, like it's, to me, it was kind of funny where I was like, oh, all these people are arguing about this. Like it's, I think Barbie's mostly interested in just being like funny. Like I think that's mostly what it's interested in doing. It's not mostly interested in being like this big treatise on feminism. It is that also to some extent, but that's not like its main focus. And I felt similarly here.
Similarly, I will say I think this one is maybe more interested in that than Barbie, but
I would agree. Yeah.
Yeah, similar vibe.
Yeah,
and especially in the reaction.
And in a different way, because Barbie is much more of like a 4-quadrant or whatever, 5, whatever that is, like the tentpole, like blockbuster comedy. Everybody can go see it. It's, you know, very broad, generally speaking. Whereas this is like the weird art house version of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the weird, but like that also just wants to be weird. Like, I don't know. Like, again, I was just expecting like a much more of the focus to be on thematically like what it was saying about women's place in the world and all sort of stuff, whereas what it ended up being, I was like, oh yeah, I mean that stuff's all there, but like it's mostly just about like this interesting character going on this journey and like
weird scenarios
and the funny like lines and like the kind of quippy like allusions to philosophy and politics and stuff. Like it's, I don't know, it was not nearly as dramatically focused on what I thought it was going to be, I guess.
I would agree.
Which was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And like I still enjoyed it like a lot. Like I liked this movie a lot without spoiling any of my, you know. But like yeah, it just wasn't quite as I don't know, like edgy as like it just wasn't as much of what I thought it was going to be. Anyways, we'll talk more about it. So we're very early on here. As I was editing, I had some more time to think about this, and I think kind of what it boils down to is that the film was not nearly as challenging on the topic of feminism as I kind of expected it to be. Based on some of the discourse I saw and stuff like that, I was expecting the take on feminism and women's role in the world and their place in society and how they fit into a patriarchal system and all of that stuff to be a lot more challenging. And I felt like it ended up being a fairly elementary, like first day kind of treatise on feminism. And again, that's fine. I think it works. I think it actually works really well for the movie and makes it a kind of more universally applicable, acceptable, understandable for more audiences. But based again on how much people were talking about it, I expected to be challenged more by the film than I think I was, which was interesting. So one of the things I thought was kind of funny is that Bella early on decides she wants to go out into the world. She wants to go outside, and they agree to take her outside. And they're driving through the city and out to like a park. And they're in this carriage, and I wanted to know, but it's a carriage that has like, it's like a car. It's like an early, like primitive car. A horseless carriage, literally. But it has like a fake horse head on the front.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know if that came from the book because I thought that was fun.
It does not, but I also thought that was a really fun detail.
Yeah. So then we, to this point, Godwin, so as we said, McCandless is one of Godwin's students who he brings on to kind of like observe Bella's progression
Yeah.
and like take notes basically on everything she does and everything she learns and like how everything's he's like he has to do other stuff, so he gets McCandless to basically like be the like caretaker and like keep up and do all the recording of information about Bella's the experiment of Bella Baxter. And he has to this point told McCandless that Bella was suffered like a brain injury.
Yeah.
And that he basically did some sort of brain surgery to like quote unquote fix her brain.
But she lost all her memories.
And like
regressed
entirely. But and then eventually, throughout the beginning of the film, McCandless has suspicions that maybe that is not actually what's going on here based on a handful of things. But then eventually he confronts him about it. And Godwin just like explains and like just comes clean and lays out exactly what transpired. And this is where we as the audience also find out where Bella came from. And it turns out, as I said, this woman, Victoria Blessington, jumped off a bridge, killed herself. She was pregnant at the time. And Godwin found her, but she was like very freshly dead. And so she was perfect for like his experiment. And so what he decided to do was to take the brain of her child, of her unborn infant, and put it in her head and then raise her as like a new person. And my favorite, I had to know if this exchange was in the book because it cracked me up in the film. And he's like, well, at that point, like, because he's talking about how like he's doing like kind of observations and like trying to figure out what to do, and he like realizes that he can't do anything with her with Victoria, but he sees that she's pregnant and that the baby is like alive still. And he says, and at that point it was obvious. and McCandless says it was, and he goes, yeah, take out the infant's brain and put it in the full-grown body. And McCandless is like, what the fuck are you talking about? And I loved every one of those interactions where Godwin is just like, oh, and then I did the very obvious thing, and McCandless is like, what is wrong with you? And I wanted to know if that exchange came from the book because it cracked me up.
That specific line is not from the book, no.
But one of the other aspects that I loved of that, and this is where I thought the movie was at its best in terms of the kind of the criticism, the commentary on women's autonomy and that sort of thing, was moments like this, where the whole conversation is framed around the fact that, that's what it was. He says, like, I couldn't bring her back to life because she was I could have kept her alive, he says. Like, she was, there was still electrical energy and stuff. I could have like kept her alive and maybe even brought her back to life. But he's like, that would have been immoral. That wouldn't have been right because she killed herself and I wanted to respect her autonomy, essentially. And so this whole conversation is framed through this weird perverted lens of Godwin respecting her autonomy. So he doesn't bring her back to life because she chose to kill herself. But instead, he just cuts the brain out of the baby and puts it in her head, and it's like like violates her autonomy and like it's just an insane like situation, thought to even have. But I love that it's framed through the idea of respecting autonomy, because I love that about Godwin and particularly McCandless, is that they both, I think, view themselves as like very moral people. Kind of in contrast to Duncan, who knows he's like a shithead.
Yes.
Like Duncan is aware that he's a piece of shit.
Duncan knows what he's about.
Yes. Whereas these two both, fancy themselves very moral, like reasonable people.
They're men of science.
Yes, men of science. And and so everything about this conversation I absolutely adored and thought was fantastic. But yeah, I loved the framing it through the like lens of like respecting her autonomy while you're removing her brain and putting her baby's brain in her. Yeah.
No, and it is framed the exact same way in the book, where he's like, oh, who would I be to bring her back against her wishes? That would be disrespectful. I wouldn't be respecting her choices, blah, 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 blah. And I think it was at that point when I was reading when I like started laughing and said to you that I thought I understood what people misunderstood about the movie.
Yeah.
Because that is very, very clearly meant to shine a light on the fact that he's in fact not
Yes,
respecting her
exactly,
autonomy. We're pointing at it with big red arrows.
Yes, yeah, and we'll get to it later because this movie, we'll have more about that discussion. We're in the Lost in Adaptation section. We're going to talk specifically about what we kind of previewed in the prequel episode about, like, is Poor Things misogynistic or whatever. And we'll get to it. I mean, spoilers, I don't think it is really ultimately, but it is, there's some nuances to that. But anyways, we'll get to that later. One of the other little details that I thought was interesting is that we find out that Godwin, every time they have a meal, Godwin has to hook himself up to this machine that basically does his digesting for him because he doesn't have any gastric juices because his father, who was also a scientist, removed them all as an experiment for some reason. And he's like, well, it turns out you actually need those. So he has to hook himself up to a machine to eat. And then the machine like makes him burp up these giant bubbles of like digested food or something. I don't know, whatever. It's very interesting, but this is the beginning of, as we slowly over the course of the film, it's revealed more and more. And this is also a very funny, like, comedy recurring beat of Godwin revealing the horrifying things that his dad did to him, like, very matter of factly, and not realizing that they were horrifying things.
Yeah.
He's like very, he's like, oh yeah, and then he did this to me because, he was a scientist and that's just what you do.
And then McCandles is like, no. Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Because that's another big thing that this film obviously is about is kind of the cycle of trauma and the way, quote unquote, hurt people or whatever. Because that's ultimately what the reason that Godwin does the things he does without even really realizing it is because he was, deeply abused and traumatized by his father. But I wanted to know if specifically the food machine thing, but also just generally Godwin being experimented on by his dad came from the book.
So it is mentioned in the book that Godwin has to create his gastric juices outside of his body because he has little to no pancreas, is what the book says. And there's like a small like laboratory type setup behind the dining room table at which he does this. However, there's no machine and he doesn't burp bubbles. He like creates the juices and mixes them with his food.
So he basically,
So now the
which feels probably more like quote unquote realistic. If that were to be, again, it's all
probably
nonsense, but
I don't know.
That feels more like real in my head as a
So the senior Dr. Baxter's medical experimentation on his son is brought up at different points throughout the book. So that does come from the book. I don't recall if the food issue was specifically brought about by that, but I think we're supposed to assume that it was regardless, is the vibe that I got. Whenever there's something strange going on with Godwin in the book, I think we're meant to assume that it's a result of his father. As far as the food machine and the burping goes, though, in general, I thought the movie's take on that was more fun and whimsical.
Yeah.
Again, with the world building.
Yes. The thing, so this is what I want to touch on from the Guess Who segment, but it sounds like maybe not what I was thinking, is that when you read the description of him and without the the disfigurement or whatever on his face, the scarring and that sort of thing, I was thinking, well, maybe Godwin doesn't have the backstory of his father having experimented on him, and I was wondering if maybe this was a change the movie made to make Godwin a quote like a slightly more sympathetic character than he would have been otherwise. So like if Godwin was just some mad scientist performing these experiments and we don't really know anything about his past or anything, he's kind of just a villain. Even if he's nice about it, he's kind of just a villain. Because unless they give us some other explanation or something, but in the film, and it sounds like also in the book to some extent, we're meant to sympathize at least to somewhat with him because he has also been the victim of all of these horrible things, and it's warped his worldview so deeply that he doesn't even realize that what he's doing is deeply fucked up. Like, he doesn't even realize. And again, I don't think it's the movie, and this is I think one of the areas where people could be critical of the film, and especially because at the end, like, he's very much kind of in the film's language of the film, he's kind of like I don't want to say redeemed. He's not redeemed, but he gets kind of a happy ending,
Mhm.
like relatively speaking. Like he dies with the people he loves around him, and it's a rather
Yeah.
sweet scene. So he
Yeah.
gets essentially a happy ending. And so I'm sure I can understand the criticism of somebody watching it and being like, well, he's, the movie treats him like, oh, poor him, all these things happen to him, but and just doesn't really care that that he also did these horrible things. And I think it's just, it's one of those things that I think mileage is going to vary for people on like how much that works or doesn't work for them. And I think that has a lot to do with like personal experience and stuff like
Mhm.
that. But to me, I found it as just kind of one of the interesting kind of other thematic things the film is doing, which is exploring the idea of the way trauma begets trauma, and that how somebody growing up in this horrible fucked up situation can have their life fucked up without even realizing it, which I think is one of the kind of important interesting distinctions about Godwin, is that it's not like he the things he's doing he like knows are bad. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting that he has this warped worldview because he was raised in this horrible situation.
Yeah. Well, and I don't even, at least in the movie, I don't even know that he realizes what was done to him was horrible.
That's what I'm saying.
So,
Yes,
yeah.
that's what I
And
mean.
I
Yeah.
do think that it's an interesting and worthy exploration of the cycle of abuse, because I think people do have a tendency to think of that cycle as more like purposeful
Yes.
than it often is.
That's what I mean, yeah. And I think that's what I thought was interesting about it. But I also understand that for some people, they're going to look at that and go, well, the movie just says, oh, well, I guess if you've been abused ever in your life, it's fine if you abuse other people. And I don't,
Yeah.
that's not what the movie is saying.
No.
That is not at all what the movie is saying. What the movie is saying, though, is that those kind of relationships can be complicated. And the fact that Bella then goes on this journey and comes to kind of accept and care about Godwin after her whole journey, she comes back to him and like has this tender moment with him at the end, I think is less about sort of validating Godwin and more about validating the journey that Bella went on, and the fact that she can get past, she is no longer the victim of his she has her own thing going on, and I think there's something meaningful to that. It just may not land for every single person that watches it.
No, I
think.
agree.
As we move forward through the story, McCandless spending more and more time with Bella, and he's kind of falling for her. And this is a very interesting depiction too. And I'm just gonna ask my question, and then we'll get into it. Is that McCandless wants to marry Bella, and Godwin actually suggests that he marry her because he's like, oh, I've seen you two, and I can tell that you guys you have feelings for each other or whatever. And so like Godwin kind of encourages it, but I wanted to know if McCandless falling in love with her and wanting to marry her and Godwin encouraging that came from the book.
McCandless does desire to marry Bella. He is smitten with her at first sight in the book. As far as Godwin encouraging that, my notes are scattered all over the place. So in the book, it is not Godwin's idea for McCandless to marry Bella.
Okay.
And the book leans a little more into the idea that it was Godwin's original intention that like, oh, maybe she'll fall in love with me.
Oh.
But he pretty quickly abandons that idea. Which I think the movie does like bring up.
Yeah, it does, because McCandless says like, "Oh, I didn't know if you were planning for her to be your mistress or something," and Godwin says something along the lines of like, "Oh, I thought about it, but something about his paternal instincts being too strong, or I don't know, something like that." Yeah.
My thoughts on some of the changes from book to movie here are kind of 6 of 1. They spend a lot more time together in the movie, so like their relationship develops more, I guess.
Yeah.
Trying to scroll to where my other note is.
Sorry.
Because in the book he meets her one time, like where he initially like sees her and she's very, very childlike.
Yeah.
And then the next time that McCandless interacts with her is like months later and she's like more in the realm of manic pixie dream girl
Yeah.
and less acting like a literal toddler.
Yeah.
We spend significantly very little time with Bella while she's like extremely childlike
Yeah.
in the book.
In the book.
Whereas so like I like I said, it's kind of 6 of 1 for me because they do arguably get more like relationship development in the
Yeah.
movie, but also most of it is taking place like while she's a baby.
Yes. So I will say that I do think that, and I think that's intentional. I think because I don't think we're supposed to even like McCandles that much. Ultimately in the film, I think he's like the best of the men in the film, but I still don't think he's a good guy. Sorry, in his relationship to women. I think he's like an okay guy generally. Like I think the film presents him as like a fairly moral person overall, and certainly more moral, more whatever, like a better person than Godwin or Duncan. But I also think the film is I think we're supposed to feel grossed out by the fact that McCandles is into her so quickly. Because yes, at the point where he is like falling for her, she is still essentially like, she's not an adult. Like her mental capacity is not that of an adult. And the movie it plays with this tension because it is like the movie plays with the fact that we never know exactly how quote unquote old she is. Like, because there hits a point where she is clearly forming thoughts and stuff at a level, even though she speaks like in a very unique way, she's clearly operating mentally at a level that is not a child. Like she is operating, like the way she interacts with the world is more of that of an adult. So, but the movie I think intentionally leaves it nebulous so that we don't have like an easy like cutoff line of like now she's an adult.
Yeah.
Because I do think it's pointing a lens at the fact, because I think what it's criticizing here, or at least to some extent, is because I think we're kind of supposed to view McCandles and Duncan as essentially two sides of the same person, like two sides of the same coin, in the sense that they're both attracted to her for the exact same reasons, that she is this sheltered, she is like the perfect ideal of like a virgin, naive bride. Like that is what both of them like about her. McCandles is like less crass and less forward about it, and slightly more, he's like, oh, we'll wait to have sex until we're married and that sort of thing. Like he's more like prudish and like Victorian about it. But I think like the thing that he finds attractive about her are the same things that Duncan finds attractive about her, and I don't think we're supposed to like that about either of them.
Yeah, no,
is
I
my
agree.
point.
I
You get
agree.
what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
and so I think that's one way, and I could be wrong about that, but I truly don't think we're supposed to get to like the end of the movie and think McCandles is like a great person. Like now they end up together seemingly at the end of the film, and he's a better person who does ultimately respect her autonomy and stuff way more than like anybody else in the film. But it's not initially. I think it is playing with this idea of like he's also shaped by the society he was raised in and finds her demure, not submissive, but like sort of childlike traits attractive, which I think in my opinion, the movie does not think is a good thing. I think I can understand how somebody could watch it and not get that, but I truly doesn't to me ultimately feel like the movie thinks that's okay. But speaking of McCandles being a slightly better person than everybody else in this story, there's this great exchange between him and Godwin during the marriage proposal, not proposal, but when he's proposing it to Godwin, or when Godwin proposes it to him, they have this exchange. And Godwin says, yes, you can marry her on one condition. And McCandles says, well, she must agree to marry me, obviously. And Godwin responds, 2 conditions then. That one you said, and you must live here with me. And I loved that exchange so much. So funny. And I wanted to know if it came from the book.
That exchange is not from the book. As I said earlier, it was not Godwin's idea for McCandles to marry Bella. they're McCandles and Bella are taking a turn about the park, and he accidentally blurts out "marry me"
Yeah.
to her, and she takes that idea and runs with it. But Bella does stipulate that she wants them to go on living with Godwin after they're married. So that's kind of
she stipulates
from the
that.
book.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's not a Godwin thing.
No.
Interesting. Okay. But then at that point, this is where we're introduced to Duncan Wedderburn, who is a lawyer who's working on the marriage contract for Godwin, or for Max and Bella. And he sees Bella. He's interested to like, why are you? This is such a unique marriage contract. And he goes up and he like meets her and is like, flirting with her and stuff, like what, sexually assaults her, which she doesn't realize, but and is like flirting with her and stuff, and then leaves, and then comes back and later and they have sex and blah, blah, blah. And he like basically he's like, come away with me, let's go to Lisbon. And she's like, okay, yeah, because at this point she is like very much entering the stage of her life where she wants to explore and find new things.
She wants to be where the people are.
Yes, exactly. And I wanted to know if she ran away to Lisbon with Duncan.
She does run away with Duncan. But I believe the first place they go in the book is Odessa, although I could be wrong about that. Well, it's in Ukraine now. Although I will admit that I am not up enough on my Eastern European history to know
like where
what that would have been considered at the time.
Don't know, and I'm not going to comment because I have no idea, and I know it's complicated. So now they're off in Lisbon, and I really liked this. This is another scene that I thought was kind of the movie at its best that I really enjoyed, in terms of the commentary on like kind of feminism, on men and that sort of thing, and as a criticism of men and the men in this film, is that they're at this fancy dinner in Lisbon at this like ball or whatever. They're having dinner. And Bella does not like whatever it is they're eating, and she just spits it out like onto the plate. And they're sitting with another couple at this table, and she just spits the food out of her mouth onto the plate. And Duncan is like scandalized by this. He's like, "What do you just don't do that?" Because it's very obviously impolite. And then later, the other girl the other woman at the table has some line about holding something in her mouth or whatever, and Bella realizes that she's making like an innuendo about like sex or whatever, or like, and Bella says, yes, that was a joke about his penis or something, and she says some line about Duncan's penis being salty or something like that. And again, this also scandalized because she says out loud the thing that they're only alluding
the thing
to.
that is supposed to be innuendo.
Yes. And again, so they Duncan pulls her aside, and they have this kind of spat in the hallway. He's like, "Look, don't say any of that stuff. Just say you're delightful and blah blah blah, all these things." And I wanted to know if that exchange and that scene came from the book, because I love the way it explores the idea that the thing that Duncan is attracted to about her is her very forward nature, and like the way she is not prudish, and she's not shy about like sex and stuff like that, because she doesn't know to be like, she's not, she doesn't really understand, she's not been conditioned by society to be like ashamed or anything like that. And so he likes that about her, but then like in private, but then when they're out in public, he's like, oh, like he hates that same element of her personality he hates and is embarrassed about. And I thought that was a really good dichotomy and a really good kind of way to basically illustrate the Madonna horror complex, kind of like a version of it, like a slightly different version of it. Again, I want to know if it came from the book.
That specific scene is not from the book. And I do think that the movie emphasizes a little more that like Madonna horror aspect of Duncan's issues with Bella. But this part of the story is also told via a letter from Duncan to Godwin, and his perspective was a little difficult to parse. So I may have been misreading that. I felt like the movie maybe emphasized that part of it a little bit more than the book did.
Okay.
But he does like very quickly become disenchanted with Bella. And I think this was the part of the novel where I turned to you and said, I think this might be a deconstruction of the manic pixie dream girl trope.
Yeah.
Not that title of that trope specifically, because I don't think it was coined until like
Yeah, I
2005.
don't think it would have existed.
But the trope
Right,
itself is
yeah.
very, very old, and I do think that Bella falls into it to some extent.
Absolutely, yeah.
That, you know, that kind of childlike,
mean-
quirky,
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, the manic pixie dream girl trope, and it's the born sexy yesterday trope.
Yes,
It's both of
it's
those.
both of those
literally like exploring and deconstructing both of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do feel like it is at least a little bit a deconstruction of that, at least the Duncan part of the story, because I feel like what the book and the movie are positing is this idea of like what would actually happen
Right.
if a person was
yes.
really like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, yeah, what if this person was actually like this? Is how it would actually go down.
Yeah.
But I also just really, yeah, I appreciated that it really highlights the hypocrisy of Duncan and thus men in general in that scene of, yes, he likes the fact that she doesn't, she just wants to have sex all the time, and she's not, she's untroubled by being forward about sex and saying what she wants, and is crude and like in certain ways and that sort of thing. But then again, when they get in society and out in front of people and she behaves the same way, he's like, wait a second, no, I don't like this is awful.
No, he enjoys her eccentricities until it's no longer making him feel big and important.
Yes.
And he enjoys her sexuality until it's no longer just his.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Incredible line that I have to know is in the book, because it's from that same scene where as they're sitting at the table, and I think this is actually right before they have that big argument. They're sitting there eating, and a baby across the room starts crying, and she just drops her fork and says, "I must punch that baby," and storms off to go punch a baby. And that killed me, and I want to know if it was in the book.
It is not from the book, but it is very funny.
Yes, it's incredible. So then they get back from their little spat in the hallway, and there's this music starts playing, and they decide they must go dance, and they have this ridiculous dance scene because again, Bella doesn't really know how to dance or anything like that, so she just kind of is doing whatever feels right. So it's very silly to our eyes. And I actually thought it was kind of interesting and fun that Duncan just joins in and doesn't really like.
I think he's trying to save the moment.
Okay.
When he joins in.
Is that
like,
what you
I
think's
think
going
he's
on there?
trying to like kind of reel her in and
like
take
make
control.
it less embarrassing.
Yeah,
quote,
and make
unquote.
it look a little more.
Okay.
Because she just goes out there by herself.
Yes.
Which is not really done.
No. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense for sure. But then after they finish dancing, there's this old man across the room who keeps winking at Bella, and she keeps winking back at him. And Duncan's like, what are you winking at? And she's like, that old man over there. I can't remember what she says. It's something about being polite or something. I must be polite. And then he realizes, because she doesn't realize that this old man is like hitting on her, and he realizes, and he goes and starts a fight. And I wanted to know if the dance scene and the old man blinking at her came from the book.
Alas, none of that is from the book. But I also enjoyed those scenes.
Yes, I thought that was fantastic. Then they get back. I believe they might have go sex or something, go and have sex for some more. And then she goes and like ventures out into the world for a bit, I think. From my memory.
Yeah, I think the scene is like a little bit after.
Yeah. And she disappears for a while on her own and kind of explores Lisbon for a bit on her own. And then she comes back and he's there and they're having an interaction, and he's about she says, "Hey, we should have sex." And he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." And he's like going to go down on her, and he like pulls her dress up, and then he sees that she has these 2 tattoos on her. I think they're tattoos. It looks like.
I thought it was just like ink.
Oh, maybe
like
it's just
somebody
ink.
like the guy wrote on her with ink, but maybe they are supposed to be tattoos.
I assumed,
don't know.
okay, that would probably make sense. Maybe she just wrote on it. No, yeah, because she has the pen that she writes on. That's probably what it is. I thought that makes more sense. But anyway, so she has written soft and softer on the inner thighs of both of her legs, and he's like, "What is this?" And she explains that some guy asked her like how soft her skin was, and she was like, "Oh, probably," or like, and she's like, "Well, the skin on my inner thighs is the softest," and then she like something about feeling which was softer, and so she wanted to remember, so she wrote it down on her legs, and one is soft and the other is softer. And this obviously annoys Duncan because she explains during that without realizing. She's like, "Oh yeah," and then he ate me out, and he's like, "What?" And he's like freaking out, and she's like, "What are you talking about? Like, what's your deal?" Because to her, she does not understand the concept of monogamy
Mhm.
at all. And I wanted to know if that scene came from the book because I enjoyed that scene.
It was also not from the book. I was actually pretty neutral on this one. I
Why?
thought it was fine.
Okay.
It didn't do a ton for
I just thought it
me.
was funny. I particularly if there had been tattoos, I thought it was very funny. But even still, I just thought like the writing, the soft and softer on it was very funny. And then this specific line I cracked me up is that he then storms out because he's very upset that she's been sleeping with another or having sex with somebody else. And as he's leaving, she yells at him, "What about the tongue play you were about to perform? Is that not happening?" And he like slams the door. And I want to know if that line came from the book. It was funny.
Also not from the book, but I did think that line was funny.
It is very funny. So then he's very upset with her because she wants adventure and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, all right, well, I have an idea. And he's like, get in this trunk. And then he puts her in a trunk and takes her onto a cruise ship. And then they're on this cruise ship now. And this is like the next vignette or the next, stop on this odyssey that she's on. And they meet some people. She's like wandering through the dining area and she meets these two people. And one of them is this older woman that I can't remember the name. I can't remember her name.
I think her name was Martha.
Martha or something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Margot?
I think it was Martha.
Yeah. And
Harry Astley.
Astley, that was it. And she meets these two people. Harry Astley is a cynic, and then the old lady doesn't have she's just an old lady who's out enjoying her life. And I wanted to know if she made friends with these two people because I really enjoyed their scenes together. I thought they were really interesting and funny, particularly her and the old lady. Seeing an older woman and like what the future of like she has like no concept of like aging or like what it could mean to be like an older woman or whatever. Like she just truly has no frame of reference for any of this. And so meeting an older woman and like the older woman is like, well, I haven't had sex in 20 years. And she's like, what? She's like freaks out. And I wanted to know if those two characters came from the book because I really enjoyed them.
So there were some changes here that I really liked. In the book, Bella does make two friends while she's traveling with Duncan who help her start like exploring and growing from more of like an intellectual, philosophical perspective. Whereas up to this point in both the book and the movie, we've been covering more like exploring your body. Now we're
Yes.
exploring the mind.
Yes, which is what the movie does too.
Yes. And in the book, these friends are both men. So we have an American missionary named Dr. Hooker and an Englishman named Harry Astley. And first, I absolutely adore the decision to replace the male missionary with a sassy old lady.
Yeah.
And I like that the movie acknowledged that Bella should have female role models on this journey,
Right.
and especially older and wiser ones, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And I really liked the scene where Duncan throws the book that she's reading overboard, and she just hands her another one.
book, yeah.
Harry Astley is mostly the same as he is in the book, but I felt like the movie implied that he's a queer man, was an implication that I got based on like dress and carriage.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
And the actor is also an out gay man.
John Carmichael,
And I liked that a lot if that was intentional, if that was, purposeful. And these two characters, I think, come off as real friends to Bella because they don't seem to be interested in using her to fulfill their own desires.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unlike almost everyone else she interacts with.
Except for Harry, but he acknowledges that.
Yeah, he acknowledges that and apologizes.
Yeah.
And also, Astley not being interested in her sexually or romantically, I think adds another layer to that.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he does ask her to marry him.
Yeah. Yeah. In the and we'll get to it here in the next question. But yeah, in the film, he is using her kind of in the sense that he was like, oh, I was showing you these awful things really just to like make myself feel better, kind of.
Yeah.
Like to kind of ruin you because I hated seeing your naive like joy or whatever, and I'm just like this cynical guy, and I was like, yeah. But he does apologize and like acknowledge the fact that he was doing that. But You mentioned the scene where Duncan throws the book that overboard. That was my next question. Is that Duncan starts getting upset because Bella. This is when Bella starts reading. She's getting books from Harry and from Martha, and she's starting to read more and more. And as she's reading more and more, her very unique sort of stunted speech pattern
Hmm.
is going away, and she's speaking in a more quote like traditional, you
Hmm.
know, learned, way or whatever. And I wanted to know, but this annoys Duncan. He does not like this in particular, because, and he says the reason for that is because like he likes her unique way of speaking, and that the fact that it's disappearing is he doesn't like that. And I wanted to know if that element came from the book.
So similar to the movie, in the book, Bella's speech does change slash grow as she herself is growing and learning. However, I don't recall a specific scene like this one with Duncan where he's like specifically upset by that.
Yeah. And it is interesting because I one of the criticisms I saw of this movie, I think that I remember reading in one of the reviews, was that the movie centered almost exclusively her sexual maturity as like the journey of a woman, and I don't think it does at
No,
all.
I disagree with that
Yeah.
a lot,
And
actually.
and maybe I want to be fair, I may be shortchanging it. Like that was just like one sentence or one part of a review I remember reading. But that may not. I don't remember this. In the sum total context of the review, they may have more criticisms or whatever. But I don't agree with that at all. That particular criticism, because yes, that is the start of her journey.
Hmm.
But I think it's, and that's where actually I think the movie kind of veers into a place that I think goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that while I expected it to be like a treatise on feminism, which it and like woman's autonomy and stuff like that, and it absolutely is, it's also just about growing up, period.
Yeah, it's a coming of age story.
Like regardless of gender, because it is like her journey starts in this very hedonistic realm. It's all about experience. She discovers pleasure, she
Hmm.
discovers sex, then she discovers
Food.
food,
Yeah.
she discovers all these very simple hedonistic pleasures. But then eventually she gets beyond that and starts reading and starts learning about philosophy and starts learning all these other things, and she enters into this more intellectual kind of pleasures and pursuits and that sort of thing. And literally that's ultimately where the film ends up. Like the film is about her going on that journey and becoming a fully intellectual, independent person, or not intellectual, but a fully independent person who is pursuing like intellectual desires and her own whatever it is she wants to do. And it's not about just like, oh, she like her whole womanhood is summed up by like her like learning to have sex or wanting to have sex. Like that
Yeah.
very quickly falls away and is not what her character is.
No, I agree. And I feel like maybe some people who levied that criticism got distracted by the fact that there is a lot of sex in
Yeah.
this movie.
Yeah, there is.
There is. But even like later on when she goes and she's at the working at the brothel, that's not about her just having a lot of sex. That section is very clearly about like emotional maturity and
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
using the things that she's learned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, I thought that was an interesting critique because I was like, that's not at all like what to me the movie's about. So much so that I think that, which honestly maybe kind of is what maybe some people might criticize the film for, because it seems like it's more about like this woman's autonomy and stuff like that. When I think ultimately it does kind of circle back to this being this broader general
Hmm.
story about just growing up and like and the phases of your life that you go through as you're figuring out who you are regardless of gender. Obviously her being a woman plays a big role in that because of this society that she's growing up in, and the movie interacts, the movie does a lot of commentary on the way that a woman growing up in this patriarchal world interacts with this patriarchal world and the way it affects her. But like ultimately it's really about like just broadly, yeah, like the kind of stages we all go through in our lives and where you figure out like who you are and what you want and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Which I thought worked and was interesting. There's this great scene where, and I don't remember why he wants to, because she's like a bad influence, right? Like that's what,
Yeah.
like Duncan gets upset because she's been spending all this time with Martha and Harry, and he's like, Martha is the problem. She's this bad influence, and she's the one who's changing you. And he goes, I'm gonna kill her.
I could only hope to someday be called a bad influence by someone's debauched lover.
Yes. And I absolutely love this character, but he's like, I'm gonna go throw her. I'll throw her overboard, and and Bella's like, I dare you to, and he's like, I'll do it, and he like storms out to the deck, and he's like goes and he grabs her chair, and he's like gonna drag her over to the side, and she's just laughing, and the boat staff,
completely unbothered.
the boat staff are like stopping him. But because he's like drunk or whatever, but I love as he goes to drag her, he's like, I'm gonna kill you. And her line is, oh, good. I never imagined being murdered. How dramatic, which is amazing. And I want to know if it came from the book.
This is not from the book, but it was one of my favorite little moments in the movie.
It's so good. And her character, I just thought was delightful. So then she goes and spends some times with Harry Astley, who takes her to Alexandria, and they're on this little like castle-y
I'm
island.
not sure what
thing.
exactly they're supposed to be on.
It doesn't matter. It's again, this is all very surrealistic fantasy stuff. It looks like a MC Escher painting or something like that.
It looks like something you'd put in a fish tank.
Yeah, exactly. But they're there hanging out and like having lunch or whatever, and then he goes and he shows her. He goes, look, like the world's not all amazing. Look at this, and he takes her to the balcony, and then they look down into the gutters, like this like area below the castle-y kind of place that they're in, and there's all these poor people down there, being miserable. And he's like, look, see, this is the reality of the world. Like we're only up here because they're down there, and that sort of thing. Basically, just like explaining the cruelty of the society that they live in, because she's unaware of this. And I wanted to know if that element came from the book. And then if she also then after that, she's very affected by this and decides, I know I can fix this. I'll just give all of Duncan's money that he won to the poor people, and that'll fix everything. Does that come from the book?
The part where she goes and sees the suffering of the poor is from the book. I don't think the money thing is. There is a bunch of stuff that happens with his like gambling winnings, but I do not believe she tries to give it away to the poor in the book. But she does go, like Harry takes her to go and see the slums, quote unquote. And she sees them from like much closer in the book than, because they're like up on this thing in the movie and like looking like way down at them. And there's one like specific, there's like a blind girl who's cradling a baby that kind of becomes the focus of that scene. And Bella like wants to adopt them and take them back with her, and then is distraught when told that she can't do that. And Bella being disgusted by the way that the world is and wanting to change it is perhaps one of the book's clearest themes and like strongest through lines. Comparatively in the movie, it feels more like something that gets introduced and explored to like some extent, but not fully resolved.
It definitely doesn't get resolved, but I think it's left hanging, and I think it's safe to assume that that is like still a pursuit of hers when the movie ends. But it's not like there's not like a button put on it of like, oh, and she set up some charity, or she, is like fighting to dismantle capitalism, or like there's nothing, like there's no overt like explanation of like what she intends to do or whatever, other than like she's becoming a doctor. But I do think it's safe to assume when this film resolves, or when the film ends, that is still one of her goals, because it is a main point of the second and third act of this film, is her desire to help people as she learns about the suffering of the world. This is her college phase. So actually, this and the brothel scene, or the brothel part, are all like her college years, I believe, is kind of what we're going for, is what it seems like. But so then since she gave away all the money, they get kicked off the boat that they're on, and they drop ship in France and end up in Paris. And they have no money. Well, Bella does, but Duncan is unaware of that. So they essentially have no money. But Bella is trying to go find a hotel room, ends up stumbling into a brothel, and the madame at the brothel explains like, oh yeah, you just, like you can have sex and for money. And she's like, what? Because Bella's like, well, I love having sex and I love having money, so this seems like a win. So she becomes a prostitute at a brothel for a bit, and I wanted to know if that came from the book.
Yeah, it does. She becomes a worker at a brothel for a while. Um, and I think that the book and the movie draw pretty much the same conclusion about it. Sex work is not ipso facto immoral, but
Yes.
it is another form of capitalist exploitation.
Or it can, yeah, it definitely can be. Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, I think it feels the same way. And I thought the same thing because I remember the one specific review that we talked about in the prequel, but I saw some other people complaining about her, like, like being very flippant about the fact that, oh, and then she goes and works in a brothel, like in France. And that's the line you have from that one review was, what was it?
I want to call out that one specific review because it said, I don't remember which review it was, but it said that the film portrayed her sex work as a smart financial decision.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's true at all.
I don't think it is either.
I think we see Bella being initially excited at having earned her own money, understandable, followed by a deeper understanding of the inherent problems with the way that system is set up.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. And that was crazy to me because, like, I think the film actually does a pretty, to my eyes, a fairly, like, balanced and good depiction of sex work in the sense that it doesn't say this is immoral and bad, but it also doesn't say this is awesome, this is great. Like, it is a fairly grounded, unglamorous portrayal of sex work.
Yeah.
That is like, yeah, she's making money doing this. This is giving her autonomy to some extent, but also it kind of sucks in some regards, and she wishes she could do it a different way. Like,
Yeah, she talks about that specifically too in the movie. She's like, I could be into this, but maybe we could do it slightly differently.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I thought the same thing. I was like, I don't know how you could watch this and think this is the movie like glamorizing sex work or anything like that. It's only glamorizing in the sense that it takes the correct moral position, which is that it doesn't demonize sex work. And if that's your problem with it, then I have a problem with your moral framework if you think sex work is immoral. It's just, I think it very accurately examines the context within which it exists and the patriarchal system within that it exists within, and says these are all issues with it. But inherently, sex work is not bad. It is all of the facets and ways that it works are problems that maybe could be fixed and solved if we fixed
and solved them.
Yes, exactly.
Also, if you're like that worried about a very slightly ahistorical depiction of sex work, please just read the book, because she actually doesn't earn any money in the book.
Oh yeah.
Because she ends up. The madame ends up taking her wages to pay off like a health inspector that she upset, which I think was that like one of the reviews like gripes was that like, well, if she was actually working in a brothel, all of her money would be gone for like room and board and things. So this is not a good portrayal.
Yeah.
Like, okay, take a breath.
Again, it just blows my mind because
this is very clearly not set in actual history.
Well, yes, and on top of that, it is a very I would think overall it's a more negative than positive portrayal of sex work.
Yeah.
Like, it is not like this glowing, like, wow, this is amazing thing. But I don't think in like at least in my opinion, again, I'm not a sex worker. I've never been with a sex worker. Like, I'm just saying, like, to me, it seems like a fairly like grounded, realistic, I don't want to say both sides like exploration of sex work, but one that acknowledges the issues while not demonizing the actual
while also acknowledging that this does give her some level of autonomy in a world where it's very, very hard for women
and
to have
occasionally
that autonomy.
Enjoyment. Like, I think that's another issue element of it that I think is fair, is like she doesn't enjoy having doing this with every patron that she has, but occasionally she does, and it's like fine, like, and it's good even, like, it just depends. And it's like, again, I think the fact that it's I think for some people any portrayal of sex work that isn't just this is awful and horrible and nothing like should be
Yeah.
illegal and like like anybody who does this is immoral or whatever. I just think that for some people that's the only depiction of sex work they're
Mhm.
down for,
I
which I
agree,
think is
yeah.
silly.
Also, the guy who was like skittering around the room like a crab cracked me up.
It's very funny,
It's
yeah. Because they just don't explain.
I
They
know.
just don't. Just like, yeah, we get like a montage of her sleeping with servicing clients, and it's like random stuff. And yeah, one of them's this guy. It's just like
She's just like lounging and he's like crab walking
Yeah.
around the room.
he's almost doing like Gollum,
Yeah.
like moving like Gollum. He's like, and she's just kind of like laying there. It's very funny. And then, so during this scene where she's also one of the other prostitutes in this brothel's name is Toinette, who she becomes friends with and eventually lovers with.
Mhm.
And they, Toinette is a socialist and is introducing Bella to socialism. She gives her a pamphlet. And they go to socialist meetings together. And as they're off to one of their meetings, she's abandoned Duncan at this point, but he's still like hanging around because he
Yeah.
doesn't have any money or anything, and he's just like wailing and being miserable. And he confronts her at one point, her and Toinette, and he's like yelling at her and like, "Well, how could you do this?" Bah. And as he's like, "Look, we're getting out of here, bye." And as she's leaving, he's like, "You're whores!" And they both turn around, and Bella says, "We're our own means of production." And I thought that was great, and I wanted to know if it came from the book.
It doesn't, but this was another favorite little moment of mine.
Yes, it's fantastic. I mean, you can't argue that within that framework. I mean, you definitely own the means of production. Well, to be fair, not really. They're working in a brothel where the woman, they're paying like but it's a good quippy line. All right, it's a good quippy comeback. So meanwhile, back in London, we find out that Godwin they're missing Bella. Godwin and McCandles are missing Bella. So Godwin decides to make another Bella, a new Bella, a Bella 2.0. I believe Felicity is her name.
Mhm.
And I wanted to know if that came from the book. Did they replace her with another one?
No, and I have to say I don't really care for that.
I feel like it didn't.
I'm not entirely sure what it was meant to be doing.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
But whatever it was didn't land for me.
I think the issue is that they just don't do enough with it.
Yeah.
Like, I think the commentary is like, look, this guy, it's not about the specific person. It's just he wants this woman to not lord over, but like to control, to be the god of literally she calls him God because
Yeah.
and so he likes that place of power, and when Bella leaves, he's now missing that power dynamic that he had, and so he wants to create another one of those to fill that vacuum, and so that he can be God again. I think is what they're going for, but again, it's so fleeting in the movie, and it's there so minimally that it doesn't.
Well,
really
and
feel
I think we're meant to maybe see him realize that like what he's actually missing is that like paternal relationship that he had with Bella.
Yeah.
Maybe. And it's not this new thing is not fulfilling that.
And I think also we're supposed to, yes, the paternal relationship, but specifically that it's not just the paternal relationship. It's specifically the dynamic and the relationship he had with Bella as a person.
Yeah.
And not like just the fact that there's this girl who is quote unquote kind of his daughter.
Right.
Like Felicity fills that role of being this like I think the movie is doing this thing where that's why he initially creates Felicity, is to fill this void that he feels like is there, where he has this daughter figure, but then he realizes, and I think we're to realize, that it's actually not just the experience of having a daughter necessarily, or having this person in his care that he is like the quote unquote father of. It's specifically the dynamic that he had with Bella, and that he actually likes Bella as a person, and that she's not some easily replaceable thing.
Right.
That being said, as a result of that, we kind of get this weird Felicity is dealt with this kind of weird, like,
yeah, with this like odd dismissive-ness.
Yes,
and
that
like
feels
like
kind of dehumanizing,
cruelty,
and yes,
almost.
yeah, and that almost feels like maybe one of the criticisms I would levy at the film is that in its haste to humanize Bella, it kind of dehumanizes Felicity in a way that
Mhm.
feels strange and
Yeah.
never really addresses
I
it.
agree.
Now, again, at the end, she becomes part of the happy commune they got going on, but it still feels a little strange.
Yeah. Yeah, I was not really a fan of that decision.
Yeah. So at this point, Godwin is dying because he has cancer, and that has spread, and he has McCandles go figure out where Bella is so he can bring her home so that he can see her again before he dies. And Bella does return and reunite with Godwin, and he explains like the truth. And I want to know if that came from the book. Does she return to a dying Godwin and find out who she actually is from him?
She does eventually get back home, but it's not because Godwin was dying. She becomes disillusioned with the brothel life, and decides it's time to go back home. Um, Now the movie has Godwin like flat out tell her the truth about her origin, which I appreciate. In the book, it's a little bit confusing because it's kind of a confusing scene. There's like a lot of people talking over each other in this scene in the book, but her origins kind of come out in the wash while they're talking with Blessington after he interrupts the wedding.
Okay.
So we don't have this scene where he like confesses.
Yeah, and again, I think that's partially the movie is definitely making Godwin a ultimately more sympathetic character, by having him kind of confess and acknowledge all of this stuff. And I get why some people wouldn't be into that. But so, speaking of the wedding, she comes back and she agrees to. Actually, she asks McCandles to marry her this time in the film, at least. And they're gonna get married, and they're at the church having their wedding. And Duncan has drags Alfie Blessington in, who he found because when they were on that ship and that one random person was like Victoria Blessington, he remembered the Blessington name and then was able to figure this all out and find the Bella's ex-husband. And I wanted to know, and then they storm in and interrupt the wedding, and I want to know if that came from the book and if she goes back with him, because that was, I think, an interesting kind of like twist that I really wasn't expecting. But it makes sense is that she abandons, she leaves, she's like, I'm gonna go with you, and she goes with Alfie because she wants to learn about her mom's life, like what happened,
like her actual history.
Yeah.
So I spoiled this in the previous question, I guess, but yes, he does interrupt the wedding. She does not go back with him in the book. What happens is that they're all having this like tete-a-tete kind of about who she is and where she belongs. And she actually recognizes Blessington as earlier when she's working in the brothel, they mention that there's this masked man who frequents the establishment, and he comes in and they call him, hang on. What do they call him? They call him Monsieur Spankybot. And he likes to come in and be spanked and treated like a baby in the brothel. And she recognizes him as this, and he's so embarrassed that he leaves, and then he commits suicide 2 days later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes, much to think about there.
Yeah, I don't even know if I want to even dig into that. That's a whole different.
The book is satirical, and it's really not important in the broad context of the book. That's just how this storyline gets wrapped up.
Right.
But I appreciate that the movie chose to have her actually go like into the belly of the beast.
I think that makes sense.
In order to close out her odyssey. The kind of danger that we see her in is discussed in the book. Like they do discuss that she was gonna get this like genital mutilation operation and all this stuff.
So that is at least so he is seemingly like a sadistic fuck in the book as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's got stuff going on. For sure. But it's all kind of theoretical in the book because she never leaves with him.
Okay.
She does tell him to fuck off in the book, and that is a great moment.
Yeah. No, I really liked her going and confronting him and not even confronting him, but kind of like going to like suss out like what happened to her mom, like what happened with Victoria and like why did she kill herself and like what was going on with that. and then this kind of I will say it feels he's a little cartoonishly evil,
A little bit, yeah.
a little, but there are cartoonishly evil people in the world. It's not like they don't exist. And this whole movie is obviously very heightened and surreal, so it's not like I don't know why I would single that out as being like unrealistic or anything like that. But I did like having her go and like have that that whole dinner scene with him and like kind of figure out like what his whole deal was and learn about her mom's past and why this all happened, and that gives her closure on the story with her mother and like what happened there in a way that I think is important and interesting. And I think it works better than if they had just thrown in the brothel thing with that whole different thing. I think that would have been too messy and like weird to try to like wrap up in a way that like worked and made sense. Whereas having her actually confront the man ostensibly responsible for her mom's, killing herself and that sort of thing, and like this evil guy, like making him the final boss, kind of, I think works. Again, as you said, as for this, she is on an odyssey. Like literally, that is what we're doing here. And so yeah, I like that change. I think that makes a lot of sense. My final question here was: does Bella transplant Alfie's brain into a goat's brain into Alfie's body? Because that is how the film ends.
No, she does not transplant a goat's brain into his head. I appreciate this as a full circle moment. I'm also not sure what the poor goat did to deserve that fate.
Yeah, me either. I feel like if anything, it should have been the other way around. They should have put his brain into the goat's body. Even that still, but like,
yeah,
because they're like, I guess he just dies. Yeah, I don't understand why. It is a very strange choice, and I'm not sure works other than as a comedy beat.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
I'm not sure it works.
It's like a comedic full circle moment beat.
Yeah.
But like other than that,
because it's not, because like thematically, it's like, what is, like, it's not like he's being punished. He's dead. It's a goat brain in his body. Like, his brain is dead.
I mean, maybe he is in the goat and we just don't see him in the goat.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. It doesn't really, I'm not sure it really works necessarily other than like as a comic button, which again goes back to kind of what I was saying earlier, that I think this movie is more interested in being funny than it is in being anything else. Maybe not more interested in being funny, but it's almost as interested in just being funny as it is at saying anything else. But all right, speaking of what this movie is trying to say, let's get into it. We have some stuff to talk about in Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So, I'd put this here because I don't know where the fuck else to put it. This is a fairly truncated adaptation. The book is actually divided into 4 parts, and the movie is really only concerned with one of those parts, which is kind of the main narrative of the book, and that's Dr. McCandless's memoir that details his wife's extraordinary origin story, which means that what the movie is missing, aside from the kind of like frame story that I talked about in the prequel, is the letter that follows the memoir. And that letter is from Victoria McCandless, aka Bella Baxter. And in that letter, she basically says, I don't know what my husband's problem was, but none of this is true. Here's what actually happened. And then gives a very like straightforward, grounded version of events.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, much of the criticism levied at the film, as we discussed in our prequel episode and also in this episode, was in regard to it being male-centric, focused on the male gaze due to its male director and male writer. I don't fully agree with that. There are moments in the film where I definitely do.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's more of an unconventional coming of age story. And most of the like sexy stuff in this film is really not very sexy at all.
I've said before, I think on this podcast, that I almost find I have no issues with sex scenes in movie, but I almost never find them actually sexy or like. titillating
My
or
hot
whatever.
take is that they're often not meant to be.
And that's yes, I agree with it. Almost always not meant to be.
Almost always not meant to be.
Yes, and in this movie in particular, I think none of the sex scenes in this movie, barring maybe like one or two, are meant to be at all like erotic. I think maybe the very first time she has sex with Duncan, like or not the very first time, but the sex scenes in the hotel room in Lisbon, maybe kind of like, but she's fine. She's discovering her sexuality and she's like, they're having sex all over the hotel room or whatever. I think that one is supposed to be slightly erotic, slightly. Or do you disagree?
No, not necessarily. I don't know, because I don't think it's supposed to be erotic per se, but I don't think it's supposed to be like disturbing like some of the other ones.
I guess that's what I'm
are.
saying. Yeah, that's fair. Maybe not erotic, because I also did not find that one remotely.
No,
the only one that I think is supposed to be remotely erotic is her and Toinette.
Yeah,
but which makes sense because it's the only one where it's like her full agency.
Yeah,
with
full agency, full consensual.
Yeah, without any level of like coercion or anything like that. And that's the only one that I think, and even that one, again, it's not like super erotic, but it's the only one that I think even feels a little erotic. Whereas,
it's and even then, it's more like romantic and tender.
Yes,
than it is erotic.
Exactly. Yes.
The main scene that bothered me in this film, and it was because of the way that it was like framed and shot, was that very first initial scene where she masturbates for the first time. And she's laying in the bed and we like just see her feet.
Yeah.
That one I thought was framed more erotically than like anything else.
Really?
In the movie. Yes.
It's interesting. I guess it is, but it's also funny because while like I agree, but it's also like the only one where you see it's just like literally like her legs and the wall. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but
it is definitely a less is more.
I don't really think you need bits to be erotic.
No, I agree, but I think most people. No, I completely agree. I'm saying that I think most people would not maybe view that one as. Interesting.
I thought it was framed as more like sensual.
Yeah.
And
no, I think
perhaps titillating than anything else in the movie. Perhaps by virtue of not seeing anything.
think that's what it is. Yeah, I think maybe they thought, and maybe I don't know if it's intentional or not, but I think it may be a case where the filmmakers felt like that was a less erotic way to portray it, but because everything else is kind of so matter-of-factly shot, like the rest of the sex scenes, I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah. Because I didn't find that one to be like, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. Anyways, sorry.
So all this to say, though, I don't really agree with a lot of the like misogyny, anti-feminist criticism that was lobbied at this movie, but in a kind of a one-to-one comparison between the book and the movie, I think it could be fair to say that by nixing that letter that follows the narrative and choosing to commit to this male fantasy tale, the movie does remove some of her agency.
Yeah, that's one of those that's really interesting because it's
and like I don't even think that she doesn't have agency throughout the film.
Yes.
But like when you're holding them up and comparing it one to one, it feels a little weird that they chose to nix that.
It's one of those things where if you just look at the film in a vacuum and you have no idea the book exists, I don't think the film is misogynistic on its own. But yes, when you put it within the context of this book that they're adapting, the person adapting it made the choice to be like, hey, actually the part where the woman at the end says, hey, this is all bullshit that my husband made up.
Yeah.
And you just get
We're gonna
rid of
ignore that. We're gonna ignore that part, guys.
There's a weird.
It's not important.
Yes,
There's a weird energy to that.
Yes, there absolutely is. That's fascinating. That is really fascinating. But yes, but without that, again, not knowing that, if you just view the film, it's like, yeah, that works on its own. And I can understand the impulse to not like muddy the film with this
Right.
extra little thing. Like I understand like the desire to like not, you know, like, and then it gets
Right.
weird. There's
And the film was already a hard sell.
yes. And then having this thing at the end where it's like, oh, actually, none of that actually happened. Like, because that's the other thing. You're like falling into this trope of, you know, like people watch that or people could watch that and be like, oh God, it's like none of that actually happened. Like that's the thing that makes audiences groan. Hell, maybe that ending was there and it tested horribly with audiences. You know what I mean?
I don't know.
Like maybe they filmed that ending where she essentially explains that none of that actually happened that way, and they decided that like it either tested horribly with audiences or it didn't come across the way they wanted or something. But yeah, no, that is really interesting.
Yeah, you know, I still don't agree with much of that criticism that was aimed at this film. I don't think it's particularly misogynistic. There are moments here and there that bother me, but like as a whole, I don't think it is. But again, comparing them 1-to-1, it's a weird fucking energy.
No, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. That's really fascinating because I had no idea that was the case, or that you know that extra little bit was in the book. Huh. All right. That is it for this. Or sorry, that is it for this film is lit. The show's over. That is it for Lost in Adaptation. It's time to find out now what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
I haven't talked about the frame story a ton, but I really liked the frame story setup in this book. I mentioned in the prequel that it was kind of set up similar to The Princess Bride, where the author opens it up with this introduction and says, well, actually, I didn't write this. I'm just the editor presenting someone else's words to you. And I liked it a lot. It gave me kind of, it gave me a little bit of William Goldman vibes. It also gave me like a little tiny bit of like Douglas Adams vibes. Really enjoyed like the setup and the style.
Yeah.
Bella calls McCandles my candle in the book, which I thought was cute.
I think she might do that once in the movie.
Does she do
I
that?
remember her saying something about candle, and I thought she might have said my candle. I can't remember.
Also, but they call him McCandles in the movie, right? That's how they pronounce it. Because I definitely said McCandless.
Oh.
Throughout the entire book in my head, even though she does call him Candle, so I guess that it would be McCandles.
No, yeah, because that would confuse me too. Because I remember reading the character's name before we watched the movie, like when I was doing like the research or whatever. And in my head, I said McCandless because that's how it's spelled.
That's usually how it's pronounced. I think.
I mean, there's two. It's McCandless. That's McCandless. Yeah.
Anyway. I didn't particularly care for the scene in the movie where she threw a tantrum in the carriage and they like chloroformed her and like knock her out. And it's a little thing. I just didn't really like it.
Again, I think it's I think it's just a little detail to try to reinforce the fucked up nature of what they're doing. Like of what Godwin is doing is just to reinforce the fact that this is not like a chill guy necessarily. Like he's deeply unwell in how he handles the things and all of the decisions he makes.
The movie is missing Alistair Gray's extremely healthy respect for nurses, which I found fascinating throughout this book. Like numerous times he goes back to this idea that all of the real healing arts are done by nurses, and if doctors all vanished, patients would continue to get well because nurses know what the fuck they're doing. I thought it was very interesting.
Seems like a guy who's had a lot of experience probably with the medical system and has mostly dealt with nurse. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like has that experience that a lot of us has had where like going to a dentist where the whatchamacallit.
Nothing but respect for my dental hygienist.
Yes, where the dental hygienist does literally everything and the dentist comes in at the end and like pokes your tongue and then is like, all right, I'm out. Yeah.
A part of the book is a long letter from Duncan to Godwin about his experience traveling with Bella, which devolves into Duncan like feverishly listing evidence that Bella is actually a demon from hell, come to torment him, and it is objectively hilarious. He like lists out all of this biblical stuff about like the coming of the Antichrist, and then gets to this bit about like, oh, they mention a cup in the Bible. I'm not really sure what the cup is, but I'm sure if we sat down and talked about it, we could figure out where the cup is and all of this.
Yeah. He does call her a demon at the end.
Yeah.
At the church in the movie, like when he's like, she's a demon. Yeah.
The book has a lot of commentary on colonialism, and in particular England's version of it during that time period, which the movie does not really address at all.
No, not at all.
We dropped that whole thing. There's also a scene, and apparently this was filmed, but ended up being cut from the final version of the movie. There's a scene where she's working at the brothel, where all of the prostitutes have to get inspected by like a state doctor. I mentioned earlier, like a health inspector or whatever that she upsets. And the reason that she upsets him is that she insists that the men who visit the brothel are the ones who ought to be inspected, because if all of the women are healthy, that means that they're the ones bringing in the disease.
Yeah.
Can't argue with that.
This is true.
And I don't know how I didn't notice until almost the very end, but this movie took the story out of Scotland, which is super important and pivotal in the book, and I feel like Alistair Gray would hate that.
I think I read something about this, and that's one of the things I heard people say, or some mention of like, oh, blah, 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 this, that, and the other. But supposedly something about him, I don't remember. But yeah, that was, there was discussion of that online somewhere about the fact that they changed that.
Yeah.
And whether or not Alistair Gray would be okay with that. Some people think he wouldn't. And then there was somebody, I thought I read something that implied that because what's his name went and met Alistair Gray, Yorgos Lanthimos, and like they kind of talked about things, and I thought there was an allusion to the idea that moving the setting was like one of the things they may have discussed and that he was okay with, but maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to go back and find I don't remember what article or whatever I was reading when I saw that, or what even it was alluding to, but it was something about some changes and basically implying that Alistair Gray signed off on the changes. But I don't know, like way back in the day, because he passed away in like 2015 or something, right?
He passed away like, yeah, not like too long ago, I think, but
it was before the film.
It was before
came
the
out.
film, yeah. He never got to see.
It was 2019.
Yeah.
So it was before the film came out, but it was after Yorgos Lanthimos had already gone and talked to him about stuff. I don't know. The implication I got from whatever that one thing I read was that he apparently potentially signed off on some of the changes that were being made, but who knows? All right. That's it for Better in the Book. Let's find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
I mentioned earlier that in the book, it's more explicit that Godwin did initially intend for Bella to be like his mistress, his lover.
Yeah.
And I liked that the movie made the call to leave out what I have deemed his major incel shit. Because he has this like whole thing that he goes on about how like he in order to feel attraction, he must be like objectively adored, and because he's so ugly, no one is ever going to adore him that way, so he has no choice but to like craft a woman from scratch.
Yeah. Okay.
Sure. Little moment that I really liked was when Duncan initially is gonna go try to find Bella, and he says like that he's gonna go use the bathroom, and he says that he has a weak bladder, and Godwin says, you may have prostate cancer, look into it. And Duncan's like, will do. I think the idea that Bella wants to like leave the house and making that kind of a point of friction, contention within the story, especially between her and Godwin. I think that's a worthy addition to the story. That's not something that's really present in the book. They Bella and Godwin actually like go travel together before she elopes with Duncan, so she's like traveled.
Yeah.
She's not sheltered the way that she is in the movie. I will say I don't know if it tracks that Godwin just immediately changes his entire view when she decides she wants to leave with Duncan, but whatever, I guess.
Yeah.
I really liked when the random hotel guest mistakes her for Victoria Blessington. And she's like, "Oh, I haven't seen you for years." And Bella says, "And you still have not."
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that. I like that we actually see Bella's affair with Twinette. It's kind of alluded to in the book, but we don't really see that. And I also like that it's Twinette who points out and explains what her C-section scar is.
Yeah.
Because in the book, it's Duncan that does that.
Ah.
So I think this is a good change.
Yeah.
And I like that Twinette comes to live with them at the end, and they have like a happy little commune.
Yep.
This is the future liberals want.
Yeah, they have their little polycule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, correct me if I'm misremembering this, but I like that the movie does not actually confirm that Max and Bella got married. They definitely do in the book. But I like that the movie seems to consider confirming this to be unimportant.
Yeah, it does not at all. It just jumps forward, and then we see them at the end, and yeah, we don't know for sure that they did.
Yeah, like maybe they did, but it's not important.
It's not really important, no. It's not about him. It's about her. All right, let's go ahead and find out what the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
This was kind of a brief thing in the movie, but we do see that McCandles is like looked down upon by his peers at the medical school, which is more of a thing in the book but it's accurate, I guess. The backstory that Godwin tells Bella about where she comes from, like the fake backstory about her parents dying in a landslide, that's from the book. And then also the way that Godwin tells McCandles about how he created Bella, also from the book, where he like sits him down and recounts this whole like grotesque gothic tale.
Yeah.
Bella does knock Max out with chloroform before she leaves to elope with Duncan. The specific speech pattern, she only does it a little bit in the movie, but where she's like listing synonyms, that comes from the book. And I was really happy that they included that because I thought it was super interesting in the book.
Yeah.
Wedderburn does turn to drinking and gambling when he can't control / keep up with Bella. And we talked about Harry Astley taking her to see the poor people and it upsetting her. And she does bite his hand.
Yeah, she bites his hand.
She bites his hand and he bleeds a lot.
Yeah. All right, that's it for the movie nailed it. We got a handful of odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. I don't know if you thought this or not, but I thought maybe there was something here that the opening shot we see of Victoria Blessington standing on the railing as she's about to jump. The blue dress she's wearing has these big voluminous sleeves, and they're like made of this material and like sectioned in a way that kind of reminded me of wings, like the way like angel wings or something, like wings like or like bird wings specifically. The way they're structured a little bit, and that felt like that might be some kind of intentional, I don't know, symbolism there of, she's
so
fleeing from this.
The big giant sleeves is a historical style that was from this time period ish.
Yeah.
The leg of mutton sleeves. I actually thought the sleeves on that blue dress, they reminded me of armor.
Oh yeah. Could be. Yeah, a little bit that too, yeah. Because yeah, there are lots of big sleeves throughout this movie, and it wasn't so much again the size or anything. It was literally like the structure of them.
Yeah.
To me, kind of looked like wings, but I could also see armor too as well.
Yeah, like with the little sections, like you mentioned, it kind of reminded me of like plate armor or something.
Yeah.
There was one point at the very beginning of this movie. I think it was when McCandles was going back to Godwin's like mansion for the first time, where they're like going down the street and it's all like distorted and like wobbly looking. I don't know what it's
I don't even
called.
remember this.
The only thing I could think in that moment was that if we had gone to see this in theaters on the big screen, I think I would have gotten sick.
I missed that. I don't
Because
remember
it was
that
so
shot.
like distorted. We're gonna have to find it again after this. And it was like the only moment that I remember of the movie doing that. And the movie does a lot with like interesting camera work and things.
Yeah.
But it's the only moment that I remember like that specific thing happening, and it made me feel ill.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I did not notice that at all. But speaking of some of the outdoor scenes, I think it's in particular, it's like one of the scenes where they're going out in the carriage or something, but there's a handful of the scenes, especially during the black and white section at the beginning, that I thought did just an incredible job of capturing the look and feel of older films. Like the lighting and the chiaroscuro or whatever, the way the light pool, like the pools of like light and dark, and not all of it feels like old Hollywood film, but some of in particular, there was like a shot where we're like looking outside that almost looked like archival footage to me, and it may have been like footage, like old footage.
Could have been.
But there was a couple of moments like that early that I thought it did a really good job of that. And now overall, it's not stylistically, it's not trying to look like the actual like film. Like the color grade and the camera work and the everything about the look of the film isn't really recreating the look of old film. Some of the sets and stuff are like, as we talked about in the prequel, like alluding to like the painted backgrounds and the very clear sound stages and all that sort of thing are evoking old Hollywood. But in terms of the actual look and feel of the film, it doesn't. It kind of looks and feels like its own thing, at least to me. But there was a handful of moments earlier that I thought, like during that black and white section, that to me very much felt like it was capturing that older film look. And in particular, the scene where Max and Godwin have the conversation where Godwin reveals what Bella's actual backstory was. I thought that was beautifully shot. The whole film's beautifully shot. It's a gorgeous film. I wasn't always a huge fan of. I liked the fisheye lens shot. There's a lot of fisheye lens shots in this, which I saw some people complain about. I didn't mind those. The ones that didn't do it as much for me was the fisheye shot through the vignette.
Like the vignette shots. Yeah, I thought those I'm sure there was a purpose to them.
Yeah, there definitely
but some
was.
of them felt a little random.
Superfluous. Yeah. There was a handful of those that I didn't really get what we were doing there. Like, why are we doing this?
And I will say that there were a lot of points throughout this movie, especially during the initial like black and white part, where I was like, okay, but I see how someone might find this like extremely pretentious.
Sure, I can get that. If you've never watched anything like this, I could see being like, what is this? I don't get what we're doing here. And like I said, I had a little bit because I think it's supposed to be voyeuristic, but it like the little like vignette.
Yes.
It's almost like looking through like a keyhole or something. I think it's supposed to feel voyeuristic, but it didn't to me feel like they were used in moments that particularly felt voyeuristic or anything like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there was one in particular that stuck out to me as like, I'm not sure why this shot is being used here specifically. And it was during the scene where the dance room scene where he rushes over to fight the guy at the other table. As he's rushing over, the camera follows him, and it's the like black vignette.
Yeah, and it just kind of
I was like,
seemed
wow.
like it randomly switched to that.
Yeah, and I couldn't figure out why.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember that moment too, and feeling confused about why we went to that specific setup in that moment. because it does, like, I agree, like, it gives you the sense of, like, voyeurism and, like, watching, but, like, who's watching? Like,
Yeah.
I know it's me, but is there some other level to that that
'cause-
you're wanting me to
and
get?
again,
Because I'm not getting
the
it.
moments that it was used didn't feel super intentional.
Yeah.
Whereas the fisheye lens shots in general that didn't have the like vignette thing, that were just like the super wide fisheye lens shots. Generally, those were in moments where you wanted to see, they wanted you to see the entire set that they're in. Like there's moments of people like walking around the manor, and you want to like, you get a really good feel for the layout of like the manor. Or like there's one where Godwin and Bella are having dinner. Like one of the first big fisheye shots we see is they're sitting at that dinner table at opposite ends, and we get this big fisheye shot from the side where we can see the entire dining room and them on either ends of the table. And so it's showcasing the actual like space that you're in and stuff like that. As well as obviously that fisheye lens just adds this kind of surreal weirdness to it. But and so I didn't really have any issues with the fisheye shots and everything else I thought was great. But it was just, the one particular like keyhole vignetted thing I couldn't, and I'm sure there's a reason. Yorgos Lanthimos doesn't strike me, and maybe he is, because there's a lot of style in this movie, so maybe sometimes it is kind of style over substance, but it doesn't. This movie is so intentional in so much of what it does that I find it hard to believe that he was just like, I don't know, we'll just do this shot with this. Like it doesn't.
Yeah.
That seems not likely to me, but it didn't come across to me what was trying to be communicated by using those particular like keyhole fisheye lens things.
Yeah.
Again, other than voyeurism, it just didn't really match the scenes though, so I don't know.
I thought the switch to color was so fun.
Yeah.
In this, giving kind of Wizard of Oz vibes.
Yep. Every set is just gorgeously stunningly gorgeous. Lisbon, the whole Lisbon set as she's walking around town, I thought was super cool and fun and interesting. And then the ship is just super gnarly and cool. And like everywhere they go, every set is just beautifully art designed and super like, God, I like the Alexandria. Like I said, it reminded me a little bit of like almost like an MC Escher like painting or something like that. I just thought so many of the sets and the set design and everything was so cool.
Oh yeah.
That. And I adored the title card screens. So like each of the sections of the film, like Lisbon, the ship, Alexandria, London, they get these title cards that kind of mark the like journey as we're going. And under the title cards, you get these really crazy, surreal scenes in black and white with like these swirling weird
like shapes and like
backgrounds. But Bella, like in one of them she's like in a bubble like floating, and one of them she's like hopping over she's like climbing that, like hopping down these like stones or something.
They almost looked like fingers or like on a hand.
Super cool, weird, surrealist like tableaus that I thought were awesome. I was honestly wishing there was more of those in the film. I think they worked perfectly fine. I'm not sure how you would shoehorn more of that in there. I think it's used pretty much perfectly, but I just thought they were so cool. I was like, I want more of that. And we kind of mentioned it, but this whole thing really did have a vague feeling of like classic literature to me.
Absolutely.
Her going on this odyssey and learning about the world from these very unique characters who all are kind of not archetypes, but are like...
Yeah. But it is like, it's a very classic setup of like person goes on journey and interacts with specific characters who teach them specific lessons.
Things. Yeah. And it just, that felt very intentional to me.
Yeah, for sure. The girl who played Twinette.
Yes, I also thought this was
if I had not already known that it was not how do you pronounce her name?
I always say it's either Ayo or Ayo Edebiri.
The girl who was in The Bear.
Yes.
If I had not already known that it was not her, I would have been like clickety clickety click Googling. Like, is that her? Because she does kind of look like her.
There is something about, I think it's her eyes. I think something in her eyes.
Something about her eyes that's like has a very similar feel.
Yeah.
I loved the costumes in this movie so much.
Yes.
I could do a whole episode on the costumes.
Did
they win at well deserved.
Yes. It won like every
snaps.
art direction. Yeah.
The historical but not historical,
Yes.
and like pulling from so many different like decades and reference points, and the way that her like she's dressing herself like a child would dress themselves, and then we see her like
The
personal
progression of-
style
yeah.
develop.
Yeah.
And like, and I loved the outfit where she's wearing like when she's working at the brothel, but they go to like the medical
Yeah.
class
she
or
has, like, it's
whatever,
that
and
black,
she has like
she looks
like
like
a
Wednesday
black
from
she has like this black dress with the gigantic sleeves,
Yeah.
and then like pointy heels and thigh-high socks. Like, perfect.
Yes.
Chef's kiss.
Yes.
Thank you and good night.
Yes, it's fantastic. Another thing I thought was interesting is like so many of the performances in this movie would not work in like any other movie. Like,
Yeah.
and we talked about it in the prequel a little bit, like with Mark Ruffalo, like what he was like talking about with his performance, and just like so ridiculous. And everybody, like, I thought Gerard Carmichael's performance was very unique and interesting, but it works for this movie. Like, but it would feel horribly like wooden and stilted in like any other movie, but because of this movie's style,
I think all of the performances are great, but if you like took that performance out of this film and put it in another film, it wouldn't work.
it would be horrible. Yeah. I think maybe other than like some of Emma Stone, I thought is kind of head and shoulders above everybody else in this movie. Especially like later in the film when she's doing more stuff. Early, it felt a little, I don't know, like exactly what I was expecting for the like childlike phase, where it's just like, yeah, okay, I've seen this. But as she grew and matures and like kind of grows into herself, the subtlety and nuance in her performance, I thought, which makes sense, like that should be the case, like as she her emotions are big and simple and kind of dumb when she
did a really good sulky.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah. No, but I just thought everybody's performances were ridiculous but perfect for this film, which was great. And I love, getting to the end of the movie. I really adored, because I kept wondering when the movie was actually going to end. Like, what's the last shot of the movie going to be? Like, kind of interested to see, because I think that could have been a very interesting thing that could have colored people's perception of the film.
Yeah, depending on what that last
shot is. Because for a second I thought, oh, they were going to end on with that. We have that shot that's kind of like slowly pulling up where Godwin's dying.
Yeah,
and they're like Max and Bella are like laying next to him, and I was worried for a second that was going to be the last shot, because if that's the last shot, this is a completely different movie.
Yeah.
But I love that it ends on just a close up of her reading. That's the end of the thing, and it's nothing more grand. It's not like as with all the fantastic visuals and chaotic nonsense of this movie, and all of the stuff it could have ended with. Just ending on a close up of her smiling as she's reading, I think, to me, cements what the movie is about. Which is, again, it kind of surprises me that people would come away from it, like with the idea that it's like, oh, like her journey is only about like sex or only about like whatever. It's like, no, it is absolutely like the last shot of the movie is her finding joy in reading. Like that's, and experiencing this rich inner world and pursuing her own intellectual pursuits. Like that's the last shot of the movie, because that's the most important thing. And so I don't know. I thought it was kind of a perfect final shot. And I think it's very important that the film end in a way like that, because otherwise I do think there could be, I think you could read maybe less, you could be less inclined to read it not sympathetically. You could be less inclined to give the movie the benefit of the doubt in terms of like what it was saying. But having that be the final shot, I think it's very clear what the movie is kind of doing. But anyways, as always, we wanted to remind you can head over to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, Threads, any of those places. We would love to hear what you all have to say about Poor Things. What are your takes on it? It's everybody's got a take. We're happy to hear yours. Let us know. We'll talk about that on the next prequel episode. You can also do us a favor by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or YouTube, wherever you listen to us. Make sure you're subscribed. Drop us a 5-star rating. Write us a nice little review. That stuff always helps. And if you want to support us, you can head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit and give us a couple bucks a month. At the $5 a month level, you get access to bonus content. We will be recording this week our episode on The Land Before Time. If you want to hear us talk about sad dinosaur movies, that'll be your chance for that. Probably the only time we'll talk about a sad dinosaur movie, I would think.
I'm trying to think of another super sad dinosaur movie, and nothing's coming to the top of my mind.
I'm sure there are
I'm
other
sure
ones.
there are
but
other ones.
There's that one. I can't remember what it's called. Isn't it just called Dinosaur? There was like a Disney movie, but I don't think it's based on a book, so it would have to be a bonus episode. And I have no desire to watch it if it's not based on a book.
I don't remember how that one ends.
I don't either, but I assume that one's sad, probably with a meteor. I don't know. Anyways, point being, we're going to be talking about Land Before Time this week, and you get access to that at the $5 level. And if you want something, if there's something you would like us to talk about, give us that $15 a month, and you get priority recommendations. So you can shoot us whatever it is, shoot us a message, say, hey, I would love you to talk about Fight Club. We already did that, but whatever it is. I don't know, it was just the first thing that popped into my head. Whatever that thing is, we will add it to our list as soon as we can get to it. Katie, it's time for the final verdict.
Sentence fast, verdict after. That's stupid.
I struggled with a final verdict for this adaptation because I feel like I'm supposed to have some kind of big opinion on it. But I really don't. I can see what both the book and the movie are doing. Both are flawed, but neither are failures. I can see maybe a little merit in the accusations of misogyny, but I also don't think that the movie deserved nearly as much frothing and raging as it seemed to get. I enjoyed the film. It's obviously very well done, visually stunning, performances are great, and the costume work is incredible. However, to me, the book felt fuller, more fleshed out. I felt like the author really had some points to make, while the movie, not that the movie didn't have points to make, but I think the movie's primary concern was spectacle, and for me, primarily visual spectacle. And that's fine, no shade at all. But Alistair Gray's novel gave me a little more to chew on, and for that reason, I'm giving this one to the book.
All right, Katie, what's next?
Up next, we are going to do a little spooky spring, and we're going to talk about We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, a 2018 film adaptation.
Yep. This one should be interesting. Shirley Jackson, for people who don't know, I mean, this is barely her most famous book, but Haunting of Hill House, I believe, is also Shirley Jackson.
And you probably read The Lottery in an English class.
Yes. Very, very prominent author. The first time we'll be doing any of her works on the show. We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Just a little tease. It was going to be a different movie that is a big movie that is out, but we're putting some time so that I can finish reading it because the book is long. And I'll say this: I can finish rereading it. We're not going to spoil what it is yet, but I had to reread it because I've already read it once for the show. I think it's obvious what it is at that point. We'll be doing that next month. Look out for that. But until next week, when we're previewing We Have Always Lived in the Castle and hearing what you all had to say about Poor Things, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.